All right, so today, we're going to unpack an idea that kind of flips a core theory of human history on its head. It suggests that for millions of years, the real engine of change wasn't what we've been told. It was something else entirely. Let's get into it.
So, what really moves the needle for humanity? What pushes us forward? For more than a century, a really popular answer has been class struggle. You know, the idea that conflict is what makes history happen. But what if that's, well, not the whole picture? What if the real driver is something way more fundamental? Something that's been with us for literally millions of years?
Well, the author we're looking at today proposes this pretty radical idea that history's main engine isn't conflict, it's the slow, cumulative evolution of technology. And this story doesn't start with political pamphlets, it starts with the first stone tools, 2.6 million years ago. From that point on, every innovation just builds on the last. Stone tools lead to stone-tipped weapons, which eventually give way to things like the wheel, and then boom, the steam engine. Each step fundamentally re-engineers how society works. It's a story of adaptation, not just antagonism.
Okay, so to really get why this idea is such a game changer, we first have to talk about the traditional model, the one it's pushing back against. This is the version of history that really defined a huge part of the 20th century, a tale of revolutionary rupture.
And that brings us to historical materialism. This is, the absolute bedrock of Marxist thought. It basically argues that society climbs this ladder of stages, from feudalism to capitalism and so on, and the only way to get from one rung to the next is through struggle, the conflict between the ruling class and the working class. And what's the end result? A sudden, violent break, a revolution.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The author doesn't just toss this whole framework out the window. Nope. Instead, they argue it was fundamentally misinterpreted, and that misinterpretation had some pretty disastrous consequences. The whole critique is about how the basic rules of change got twisted.
At the very core of dialectics is this principle, the unity of opposites. It's the idea that opposing forces, like, say, capital and labor, don't just fight each other. They're actually interconnected. They depend on each other. They form a single dynamic system. The author's whole point is that revolutionary leaders in the 20th century completely and dangerously ignored this side of the coin. And this slide just lays it all out, doesn't it? On one side, you have a balanced view, where unity and struggle are intertwined, which allows for slow adaptation and gradual change. But then you have the rupture dialectic, the one linked to folks like Lenin and Mao. And for them, forget unity. It was all about the struggle. Struggle was absolute. It demanded forced leaps, a total overthrow, and it saw the connection between classes not as a reality to be transformed, but as a problem to be wiped out immediately.
I mean, listen to this quote from Mao Zedong. It just says it all, right? There's zero room for gradual change, for that unity side of the equation. It's framing revolution as pure violent rupture, an absolute no-compromise takeover. This, the author argues, is a major distortion of the original theory.
So, okay, what happens when you go all in on struggle and ignore everything else? Well, the author argues that by trying to cram the future into the present, these movements skipped essential steps of social development. And what did you get? You got brittle, top-down, authoritarian systems that weren't just oppressive, they were also super unstable and often risked losing any progress they'd made.
So all this criticism begs a huge question, right? If forced rupture is so flawed, what's the alternative? Is there another way? Well, the author proposes a brand new model for change, one that's designed to be sustainable and democratic. It's called Adaptive Dialectical Praxis, or ADP for short. ADP is basically a framework designed to not make the same mistakes all over again. It tries to balance both sides of that dialectic, the slow evolutionary change and the possibility of big leaps forward. But, and this is the key, the whole process is methodical. It's grounded in evidence, in science, and in democratic debate, not just raw ideology and force.
So how does this actually work? What does it look like on the ground? Well, instead of a massive, violent takeover, change happens in stages. First, you start with a scientific diagnosis of what the actual problem is. Then, you test a solution on a small scale, a pilot program. If it actually works, you open it up for public debate to get buy-in, and only then do you start scaling it up. And finally, you build in regular audits to check your work and fix things that aren't working. It's about engineering change, not just demanding it.
You know, this new method doesn't just change the how, it completely reframes the why. If the whole point isn't just to blow up the system, then what are we even trying to achieve? What's the real endgame?
And men, this slide really gets to the heart of the difference.
For the Rupture model, the goal was pretty clear: seize state power, take control of the economy. But for ADP, that's just a tool, not the goal itself. The real goal is human flourishing. It's about creating a society that offers dignity, security for all, and lives in balance with our planet. The focus shifts from who has power to how well everyone is living.
So if you're using this model, how do you know if you're winning? What's the scorecard look like? Well, it's not about how much power the state has. It's about these human-centered metrics. Does society treat people with dignity? Do people feel secure? Is there real equity? Are we protecting our environment? Does everybody have a voice? These become the real benchmarks for what progress even means.
And this next part is absolutely critical. It's about making sure any progress you make actually sticks. Any gains have to be made irreversible. And how do you do that? By building the safeguards right into the system itself. That means creating institutions that demand transparency, accountability, and are built on the consent of the people. This is how you prevent things from sliding back into oppression.
There's this one quote from the text that just wraps this whole idea up perfectly. It says progress isn't just letting things happen on their own, and it's not forcing change from the top down. It's a synthesis of both. It's a movement that is measured, participatory, and most importantly, built to last. It's about being both patient and incredibly purposeful.
And that really brings us full circle, all the way back to the beginning. If technology, everything from stone tools to artificial intelligence, is the real engine driving our evolution, then maybe the ultimate challenge isn't about seizing power at all. Maybe it's about consciously and democratically steering that engine. How do we make sure that all of our incredible technological progress actually serves the goal of human flourishing for everyone? That's the question this whole idea leaves us with.